The idea of tanking nauseates me. But at the same time, I'm not stupid about it, right? And so when I say that, I don't think what the Thunder did after trading Russell Westbrook and Paul George is the same thing as what is going on in Utah right now, for example. I feel like what Presti did was really not terribly different than what happened in the early part of his tenure, starting with Kevin Durant and Westbrook, was when we have a young team, we're going to play the young guys, and we're going to see what we can do with them. But we're going to try to win pretty soon. And I feel like the Thunder really only had 1 year where they were just flat out awful. The next year they were like play in. And then the year after that, I want to say they were the number 1 seed in the West, right? So I think there's a difference between we're going to go young and play these guys versus we're just flatly trying to lose. Like, that's the point. And if it looks like we're going to win, we'll do what happened the other night with Utah, where they just flat out sat all their best players in the fourth quarter of a game because they were going to win and they didn't want to do that.
Yeah, it's a weird place, right? It's a weird place where we're at in the league, where Lauri Markkanen, all-star starter a couple years back, he's averaging 26, 27 points a game. They trade for Jaren Jackson Jr., all-star defensive player of the year. And I'm sitting there at the trade deadline. We did the Kevin O'Connor show in New York last week on Thursday. And I'm just sitting here. I'm like, what are they going to plan on doing with Jaren Jackson Jr.? Because we all know what time it is. AJ DeBonsa at BYU is in this draft, and they have a top 8 protected pick. Why are they trading for Jaren Jackson Jr.? It didn't make any sense to me, and I was curious to see if he was going to have, turf toe or Achilles tendonitis, something that it was going to knock him out for the rest of the year. But they decided to play him, and then they sat him up 7 against the Orlando Magic. They just sat him in the fourth quarter, sat Lauri Markkanen in the fourth quarter. And then against the Miami Heat the other night, same exact story. They sat Lauri Markkanen and sat Jaren Jackson Jr., and they were playing great basketball together. A little too great. So Will Hardy, the longtime coach there in Utah, said, all right, I'm pulling you. And he did the same thing with Keontae George the other night. And they lost the first game. They did not lose the second game. Miami actually lost that game. And Bam Adebayo, after the game, said maybe the saddest quote I have ever seen in the NBA. He said, we've got to figure out a way to win against teams trying to lose. And I'm like, man, that has got to be a really sad place to be in the NBA, where you're playing the Utah Jazz. You know that they're trying to lose, and you still lose the game. You can't beat that team. And I want to educate the fans a little bit on this, on the history of tanking, because last year people weren't talking about this, and it blew my mind. Bomani, last year, the Toronto Raptors, and I think this is part of the puzzle, why no one seems to care or doesn't realize that this was happening last year. The Toronto Raptors had Scotty Barnes averaging 25 and 5, and they were resting him in the clutch situations last year. There was like 6 straight games where they were in winning time, and they said, Scotty, you are sitting on the bench because we got Cooper Flagg in this upcoming draft. And they tried to tank those games. It did not work for them. They ended up with like the 9th pick in the draft, but the Dallas Mavericks went from 10-1 and they got Cooper Flagg. And after that, I was expecting, they didn't get fined. The Toronto Raptors didn't get fined for sitting their best player in crunch time and resting RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickly, Jakob Poeltl, their best players, sitting them random nights. Okay, there's going to be a copycat somewhere in the league next year, and it's Danny Ainge. Danny Ainge is out here sitting there and watching how that went last year with no fines from the NBA. They said, it's okay, by the rules, if you play a guy, we're not going to step in and say how many minutes you have to play that guy. And the Utah Jazz are daring the league office to do something about it, because they didn't do it about it for the Toronto Raptors last year. But there's one big variable that's different, Bomani. The big variable that's different between last year and this year is the gambling scandals. And so Adam Silver, after the gambling scandals, and a lot of those gambling scandals happened because of tanking, guys being rested in games in which the public did not know they were going to be rested in those games. And before the public knew about it, there was a gap of time that the gamblers could have that inside information and allegedly go bet those games in the millions of the dollars, right? That happened a few months ago. And so I'm curious to see if the league office finds some ground in order to penalize what the Utah Jazz are doing, because otherwise it's open season. I think a lot of teams are going to be going the same route if they haven't already.
And keep in mind, it's one thing when teams are doing this in March or April. We're not even at the All-Star break. You can't even fucking pretend through President's Day. Like, we can't even go that, like we can't even go, it goes back to what we talked about. How is anybody else supposed to care if these guys don't care? These games are not popular because people can gamble on them. These games are not popular because people want to see the private equity-inspired jockeying about getting the pick, right? The other thing that gets me is that they have tinkered with the lottery odds so much that the likelihood of you getting the number one pick from doing this is not that high. Like, we've seen it over and over again. And oh, by the way, drafts are deeper than ever, and you can get good players later than you have at previous points. Greg, go look at who the superstars in the league are, Victor Wembanyama notwithstanding, and go look at where they were drafted. Like, a Cooper Flagg, obviously looks like he's going in that direction.
Right.
Or you can wind up taking Paolo Banchero.
Is backed up statistically is that the best players in the league are not as correlated with their draft position, for sure.
It's not what it was before. However, this draft is different because people think it's a bunch of them in there. And what you want to do is just kind of land in that top 3. And if you land in the top 3, it'll work out okay for you. I would simply like to point out that the last time we talked like that was 2014, and we were so sure there were 3 superstars in that draft. And those 3 superstars were Andrew Wiggins, Jabari Parker, and Joel Embiid. One of them became a superstar that you ultimately could not trust at the end. And the other 2, it didn't go that way.
Bomani, I think what is most interesting to me about the flattening of the odds is we're both econ guys, right? So if you flatten the odds, the slope of that curve actually is pretty high around 8, 9, and 10 pick. Why are the Milwaukee Bucks trying to tank these games the rest of the year? And Giannis isn't having that because they know if we finish in like the 7, 8, and 9, we have a good shot at AJ DeBonta. We have a good shot of Darren Peterson. We have a solid shot at getting those guys. 10 years ago, they'd have no shot being at the 7, 8, 9 slot, getting one of those picks. But now people are talking about the number 1 pick odds. I'm talking about the number 10 pick odds. I'm talking about those guys, or in the draft lottery, the number 10 slot, the number 9 slot, the number 8 slot, they actually have real chances at getting a franchise guy. So why are these teams, Utah, Memphis, Dallas, Milwaukee, all pulling that ripcord? The Clippers were 16-3, Bomani, and they just traded James Harden and Ivica Zubac because I think part of it is, we got to figure out a way to tank this year or next year. I know the pick this year is going to OKC, but they're trying to figure out, we got to bottom out because some of these draft years we're going to have here, we've got everything lined up with James Harden and Kawhi Leonard. We got to reset this. I think teams are looking at this draft like it is all-time good, but I think what's different is that slope of that curve means that the number 6 slot, Utah, is currently in the number 6 slot. The number 7 slot, the 8 and 9 are all going to have a shot at getting one of those top 4 guys or top 5 guys, depending on what you look at. And so what the flattening of the odds did, it meant that it wasn't a race to the bottom. It was just a larger race. More people are being invited to the race. And that's what I think the Adam Silver league office did not. There's this thing called unintended consequences, negative externalities. By flattening the odds, they actually didn't solve tanking. They just created more tankers.
They redirected it.
Mm-hmm.
Look, see, this is why I fuck with you, because you use these numbers in ways that are actually helpful, right? Like the understanding of this that was like thoroughly incredible explanation of the whole situation. I'm sorry, I'm just here to salute.
Yeah, well, man. Hey, the econ degree at Wake Forest, it didn't get me into finance. It didn't get me onto Wall Street, but sometimes
it got you a much happier life.
That's, man, all the time, my buddies who are, out as iBankers or whatnot, they reach out to me from time, even when I was making nothing at ESPN as an intern, they were like, I would trade whatever you're doing in a second. I mean, I'm sitting here, you're making 6 figures right out of college and you're saying you would trade spots. But it is, man, I'm sitting here talking to you about Victor Wembanyama, 21 years old, and Isaiah Stewart beefing with Miles Bridges. and we get paid for this. So
right. And still using the EGOT.
That's right. And so I'm still using it with the draft lottery. And I think you're right. You're not hating on Utah in the sense that it's not smart that they're doing this. I think the math is the math. And last year we saw Cooper Flagg get drafted by the Dallas Mavericks, who had the 10th best odds. We saw in the year before that, Zachary Risachet, who I was out on from the start, he actually, number one pick, goes to the 9th best odds in the draft lottery. So I think GMs were already looking at the odds flattening out and saying like, hey, all we need to do is get in that 6 to 9 range and we'll be good. And now after 2 years in a row, that kind of recency bias, even if it is illogical and irrational, I think owners and GMs are seeing Cooper Flagg and how he washed away the whole Luka Doncic travesty, washing that away and saying like, hey, I love Giannis, but like, can we just get a shot at getting AJ DeBonsa or Cam Boozer or Darren Peterson? And I think that's the mentality right now for the next 2+ months.
There's only one kind of person who tries to lose. It's called losers. And that is the NBA is, and I believe, and I think this is the other part of why it's a big part of why it's so problematic that I don't think we discuss enough, which is you create a bunch of players who are losers by doing this too. Like you have these guys and you put them in these environments where you have guys who for years, like if you play for Utah, every year we hear they're going to trade Walker Kessler, right? Walker Kessler has spent basically his NBA career around a bunch of people trying to lose the whole way. You're not going to tell me that doesn't have consequences. You're just not. There's like it is an existential threat to the league because it's a threat to the purpose of the league and the idea that, well, hey, there's a logic behind it. I think it fundamentally misunderstands why we do this in the first place, what is important about this, and why people are into it. And maybe like you're a team like Utah, you feel like you can do this because y'all are, I mean, they got a hockey team now, but you're kind of the only game in town. And so when you get good, you think the people are going to show back up. Because understand, the Utah Jazz were good for basically 25 straight years. Like they were that whole Malone era, even the years after that, they didn't put a lot of bad product out there. I just don't think that you can just consistently put out all this, like put out terrible product and have a terrible environment ultimately, and it doesn't have long-term effects on your team.
Yeah, and I think we, at a certain point, we did not have a team that tanked to win the NBA championship, but then we saw Oklahoma City Thunder, and you're right, it wasn't a prolonged period. It was 2 years when they were in the 20s, their wins in the 20s, right? There were 2 years that they were bad. But it wasn't 6 years, right?
Right.
It wasn't the process. It wasn't Utah right now. So they would be the first. They would be the first to have prolonged 3+ years of being in the basement. And I also, it's a weird place in the NBA because the incentive structure is such that you're actually the carrot for these bad teams is to continue to be bad because you have a shot at Cooper Flagg or a shot at AJ DeBonsa. What it was really weird to me is seeing what the Washington Wizards did at the trade deadline, which is acquire Trae Young and Anthony Davis, because it felt like to me that they're trying to get back to being on that hamster wheel of mediocrity of in the Wizards being always 42 wins. Like the goal is to win 42 games. I did not understand that. Like the Wizards have been bad for a while, but they actually have never won 50 games in the last 50 years.
In my life, I say this every year. I'm now 45 years old, and the Wizards haven't won 50 games in my life.
And so you think Trae Young and Anthony Davis are going to do that for you? I'll give you a stat here. Anthony Davis and Kyrie Irving played 1 game together. Kristaps Porzingis, everyone was talking about the Atlanta Hawks coming into this year and how they were a sneaky team to win the East. Trae Young and Kristaps Porzingis played 3 games together. You're telling me that the Wizards are going to make a run next year? Man, I'm out. And Anthony Davis, he hasn't reported or he hasn't played. Seems like he's going to be out for the year. There's a lot of back and forth about whether he's going to be out for the year. But I'm also here like, I also don't like that. I don't like that they're trying to chase 42 wins with Trae Young and Anthony Davis. I'm not buying that either. So like, if you're asking me, would I rather be a Jazz fan? Well, I guess they did get Jaren Jackson Jr. too. If you're asking me, would I rather be, let's say the Brooklyn Nets, right? Or would I rather be the Washington Wizards that said, all right, we're actually going to try to win next year? I don't feel great about what the Washington Wizards did either. And so there's 10 teams that are in the tank trying to lose this year. But I also don't really love the idea of trying to go get guys to get back to the middle. I just don't see that Jaren Jackson Jr. is going to be the difference between Utah Jazz being relevant and irrelevant. I still think they're going to be fairly irrelevant next year.
By the way, shout out to you, Jaren Jackson. I don't know what you did to those people in Memphis. I just can't imagine anything more jarring culturally. Maybe Atlanta, but going from there to going to Utah, I just can't. Like he gonna be begging NBA young boy to let him come over there and hang out with him at that compound. This is how I feel about the middle, and I think that sometimes perhaps we could stand to divorce ourselves a little bit from the bottom line. Okay, and I mean this. If you're a Wizards fan, you telling me that you wouldn't mind going back to what it was like when Gilbert was there, right? You telling me you wouldn't mind going back to what it was like when John and Brad were there? Because if at very least you guys are having a good time, it was fun. You might not have won been a legitimate championship contender. Remember, they had a little rivalry with LeBron. Right, they had playoffs.
But they were those guys. They were born and bred in Washington, right? They were drafted by the Wizards. Like what they're doing now, it just I don't know, man.
Yeah, I'm just saying. But like, how about put out a fun team? We'll work it out. Like, give people something to enjoy. Because the thing about I understand the idea. Everybody wants to win a championship. Obviously, the idea that it's a goal to win. Yeah, I get that. But I also think that fundamentally what people really get attached to about teams is not just strictly about the winning part. And so when you sacrifice all this time with this intentional losing, you sacrifice goodwill and you sacrifice kind of a warmth that's around the team that you've got. So like right now, Hornets fans seem very happy with this team that is not going to win a championship. And sure, they would like that team to win a championship. But I think people, by and large, just want a pretty good team that they could like. Memphis, grit and grind Memphis. That's what that was. Now, granted, they had a year they went to the conference finals, and that's going to power those people for a long time. They have 4 players whose jerseys I think they'll ultimately retire. And I know that some people will be like, well, you can't retire their jerseys. They didn't win nothing. They won the hearts and minds of the people. And I do think that, there's something to that. And so it's easy and all the numbers to tell everybody all the other stuff. But I'm looking at Ainge and I'm like, go look up at the rafters in Utah, the names that are up there. It's like Daryl Griffith, it's Adrian Dantley, it's Mark Eaton, it's Jeff Hornet. Like those are names that are actually there. Now, granted, Adrian Dantley was an incredible player. Daryl Griffith, but Adrian Dantley wasn't winning no championships in Utah. But that's what this is. You know what I mean? And so that's where I think Silver also needs to look around and realize, man, you brought all these quant people in here. They only think in ways that are often counter to why people like your league.
Yeah, I think was it last night when they were advertising the Spurs and Lakers game? It was Victor Wembanyama's face, and on the other side was Rui Hachimura. And I'm like, man, that's tough sell for the NBA. Is like. And next time the Utah Jazz are on national TV, and Oklahoma City, by the way, is being investigated by the league right now because they had a bunch of guys out on national TV last week. I feel like this happens all around the league. And we're going to have, let's see, if 10 teams are trying to lose and there's 30 games left, you do the math of how many games left in the season are going to be compromised because the teams aren't trying to win every game. So, I mean, if you want to go radical, we don't have to do that. I think we might have talked about this, is getting rid of the draft altogether is the only way you're going to set.
All about it.
It's the only way. We can all day, we can talk till we're blue in the face about what if we get rid of pick protections and what if we lock in the lottery odds on March 1st. None of that's going to change things. None of that. The only thing that's going to actually fundamentally change the way teams operate and not try to lose is if you take the draft all together and now you got to sign these guys out of college.
I did something for Game Theory about doing it in the NFL draft. I'm about all of it. First of all, it's amazing how wedded the average fan is to the idea of the draft. And so, for example, remember, and I'm not trying to get into a political argument with nobody here, but you remember when people was talking about defund the police and they talk about stuff like abolishing the prisons? I admit to you, I feel where you're coming from, but I don't have a good enough imagination to figure out what we gonna do then, right? Like I'm willing. You can sell me on it because I think you're coming from a good place, but I can't imagine what you're trying to get me to right now. I'm just not that good at it. People cannot imagine a world without a draft when it's so simple. right? Like I mean, there are ways that you could come up with things like I say, if you want to try to make it about competitive redistribution, then give people the salary allotments, and then like the worst team gets more or whatever it is, and then go for it. We could call it National Signing Day, and everybody announces where they're going, and we figure it out. Like it's a sellable proposition. Soccer seems to do just fine in these.
Bomani, the product is right there. Like, are people really out on college football and college basketball because there's no draft? No, they don't care.
Right.
They love it. The fact that there's no draft. So the idea that in pro sports we need a draft is so antithetical to what we already know about what are the biggest sports in the world.